Hello everybody, and thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like my videos. Today I'm going to be on another topic that I didn't think I would ever be making. I didn't plan on making this video, but I spent all morning both watching videos in the news and reading some online papers about comments from countries that supposedly, for long periods of times, and definitely since World War II, was our friends. Or so we thought. Maybe that's the way it should be said. But a lot of countries around the world, friend or foe, no matter how you viewed them, no matter what the supposed relationship looked like between our country and theirs, most countries in the world, and certainly most of the larger European countries like England, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, West Germany, or now Germany, Canada, Mexico, a bunch of the Caribbean and South American countries, and China, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, and there's more people on that list. But since President Trump came to office and said, no, you're not going to be able to just export it or whatever you want into our country and have these giant trade deficits with the dollar going down and our manufacturing been leaving since the 60s. And, you know, we turned the whole Midwest, starting in Pennsylvania, through Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, we turned it into the Rust Belt because our manufacturing all left. This isn't rocket science, okay? So President Trump comes into office and said, no, well, some things you're not going to bring into this country, like steel and aluminum and lumber and, you know, some other things. We don't need it. We'll use what we got. And yeah, auto manufacturing is coming back, along with the part suppliers with those plants, because GM, Ford, and Chrysler / Stellantis had put a bunch of manufacturing in Canada, and that manufacturing was not ever to sell to Canadians, because I just looked at a report the other day, 93% of all automobiles made in Canada were exported to the United States. And President Trump said, yeah, if you're going to, there's going to be a price to sell stuff in our country. And they made deals around the world where how much of a tariff they were going to have to pay on everything coming into this country. But there's been a couple of big problems that have been going on forever. That was because they were allowed, these countries, even China, who's an enemy country, was allowed to just export to us with no tariff. Their economies, a friend and foe alike, were based on just exporting for U.S. dollars. They never made real economies, okay? Because it was all based on that export to America. Well, that is kind of drying up. That's coming to an end. And with a lot of our friends, no matter where in the world they were located, whether it was in Europe or Asia, their expectation was they didn't have to defend themselves because the United States would do that. That was our responsibility. We, depending on what exact time frames you're talking about, the United States was paying between 3.5%, in some cases 10% of our GDP into mostly protecting our friends. Now that hasn't been that way for so long, but it's been 3.5% to 4% for quite a while since the Berlin Wall came down. And I think since 1989, we've probably got someplace between 70 and 75% of the forces out of Europe that we once had in Europe. And since 91, we haven't had anybody permanently stationed in the Philippines, but at one point in time, we had 120,000 between the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps of troops that were actually stationed in the Philippines. But we still have a lot of people stationed in both Japan and South Korea. But the Europeans were the biggest problem because a lot of them, for a long time, were spending less than 1%. Now for this year, we're trying to get their spending up to 2%. They never built the military. They never built a real economy. The only economy they had was built on the exporting to us. The German automakers, their auto business, and largely a large part of the UK was built also, their autos coming to this country. And Italy was hugely based on exporting to the United States. We got to start calling a duck, a goose, a goose, whatever, and quit lying. So when Trump said you have to pay to import, their economies started falling apart all over the world. And that includes Canada, who I think their hard times are only just beginning. But the bottom line is suddenly all these people are saying, well, the United States is a risk. And we were paying, Mush Brains paid $321 billion to the Ukraine to fight the Russians. Well, Europe, it's in their backyard. They got about the same population as us. Actually, I think it's a little bigger. An economy that is not that far behind us. They paid about a third of that amount. They just expected us to pay it, not them to pay it. And Ukraine's not NATO. And because we wouldn't both fund and defend the Ukraine anymore, Trump told them, no, that's a European deal. You're going to have to pay for it, starting now. And now we're not a friend anymore if you listen to the speeches that a lot of the Europeans gave and a lot of the Canadians and Mexicans. We're not friends. And we didn't defend them for the last 80 years. No, we didn't do none of that. And we can't be counted on to pay for a European war when the Europeans aren't paying for it. I think it's time that we, the people of the United States, take a step back and say, well, what we were doing out of the goodness of our hearts and letting them import into here and running giant trade deficits for 80 years was out of the goodness of our hearts.